Thank you. Okay, so today I hope to finish. What I've been trying to do is to sort of lay out the state of the question in these few shiurim. I hope to finish that part today. What I plan to do today is the following. I plan to finish the question of the definition of Talmud Torah, or the addition of something to Torah in the narrow sense. Then I want to talk about science. Hi, just asking for you. Then I want to talk about science, and I want to show you an interesting example about where science and halacha or science and Torah seem to contradict, but they don't. And it's an angle that I think that will sort of flesh out or help us finish the introduction, and then we'll get down to brass tacks. Take a look at the sheets that we had before. Number 3, the passage in number 3 is a passage from the Gemara in Menachot, which has a direct, if you've noticed, is directly related to number 2, which is this passage of Medrash Tillim. What I want to do is just to tease out every attitude that comes out of this Gemara, because it's really, 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 even though it's short, it contains many, many different angles of approach. Tanya, okay. The Mishnah in Menachos addresses the question of, the Gemara says, or the Torah says, that when you have Menachos, are all meal offerings, right? There were pancakes, there were Belgian waffles. There's all kinds of things. The Torah says that on the golden table in the front part of the Beit HaMikdash proper, there should always be the 12 loaves of the lechem apanim, called the showbread. I don't know what it's called, the showbread, but the lechem apanim, whatever it is, those 12 loaves, and they should always be there. They should always be there. So the Mishnah says. So the Mishnah addresses the question: is what is the definition of always? So that's where the Gemara jumps in. Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer, afilu silek et hayeshana shachris, v'sider et hachadasha arvis, ein bekach klum, ela mani mekayim l'snei tamid, shelo yalin shulchan below lechem. Says the Gemara. The Gemara says that the Torah says that these loaves should be there always, should be there tamid. Says the Gemara. Says the Rabbi Yossi. Even, and when did they used to have the changing of the loaves, changing of the loaves? On Shabbos. No, on Shabbos. They would bake it, and then they would switch it on Shabbos morning. Shabbos morning they would give the old loaves from the previous week to the Kohanim, who were actually completing their time, their scheduled changing of the really changing the guard, and then they would put the new ones in the evening. Rabbi Yossi Omer, afilu silekat yeshana shachris v'sider techadasha arvis. Even if there was a period of time during the day that there was no bread on the table. Or it wasn't a table; it was like a frame, and the frame had 6 loaf pans on one side and 6 loaf pans on the other side, and it was sitting in the front part of the Beit HaMikdash, which is called the Kodesh. He says, even if you gave away the old ones in the morning and you arranged the new ones in the towards evening, ein bekach klum, that is not a violation of the Torah's injunction that it should be there lifanai tamid. There should always be bread there. Shelo yelech ad shulchan below lechem. There shouldn't be a day where there's no bread. But so in other words, it's not every minute of every day, but as long as that day has bread in it at the beginning, at the end. Okay? Continues the Gemara. Midvarav shel Rabbi Yosei nilmod. Afilu lo shana adam ela perek echad shachris uperek echad arvis kiyei mitzvat lo yamush sefer Torah azos mipicha. When Yoshua meets the angel at the beginning of the book, the angel tells him, God tells him, Lo yamush sefer Torah mipicha, you should always learn. Okay, so that would seem to be 24/7. And so it's one of the few things you can do 24/7 when you think about it. 24/7 says the Gemara, no, even if you learned in the morning a little bit and in the evening a little bit, that's called perpetuity. So number one, it's interesting. You have a situation in which two seemingly totally not related halachic questions have a common denominator, which is one of the major enterprises. This is one of the things that characterizes Torah Shebaal Peh, is that you find lines of connection between seemingly disparate things. In this case, a halacha that you derive from that's related to the question of the shulchan of the lechem apanim of the shulchan hazahav in the Beis Hamikdash can actually tell us something about the mitzvahs al Talmud Torah, because the question is they both require perpetuity. So in other words, rather than saying, I'll do this in Lamdisha terms, rather than saying that there's a separate halacha in lechem apanim and there's a separate halacha in Talmud Torah, no, there's one halacha in perpetuity of Talmud. And it's common to both. Before I'll take your questions, I'm going to add. I'll give you an example. One of the when I was at one time, I was farhered. I was tested on Hilchos Treifos. Excuse me. In Kri'at going towards Smicha. It turns out that the person who tested me, I passed the test, but decided not to continue with the study for whatever reason. But I did manage to get farhered means to be tested on all the Gemaras in third parak in Chulin, which deals with treifos. You know what treifos are, right? Those are the physical. What's the word? Defects, right? The physical defects which prevent an animal from being eaten, even if it's shechted properly. If anybody here is learning at Daf Yomi, then you know that for the last 4 blot, the whole discussion has all been about what happens if you properly shecht an animal, which then it turns out can't be eaten anyways. Because it has a treifa, whether the shechita takes or not. And nafkamina is whether the animal is tamei mishum nevel. It's a machlokas the Rosh and the Rambam. The Rosh thinks that if you shecht an animal, which for whatever reason, even if the shechita was good, but for whatever reason you won't be able to eat it, then the heter achila that the shechita was supposed to have given doesn't take, and therefore the animal is a nevel. It might as well have died by itself. The Rambam says no. The Rambam says that the shechita is good, but the treifos is a separate oser, and therefore the animal is tamei, but it's tamei d'Rabbanan, not d'Oraisa. All right, not important. Why am I telling you this? Because it's like 10-15 blot that I prepared for this for here, and the person who was testing me said, he asked me a question about the Gemara in Elu Treifos discusses the question of mixed sayom kekulo. Just gets you. It's all by associative thinking. So mixed sayom kekulo means if you have to do something on a day, or something happens on a day, and the day starts, then that's finished. The whole day's energy is finished. That's the reason why. It's the reason why, God forbid, somebody's saying Shiva. People get up on the 7th day in the morning. Why 7th day in the morning? 7 days, because you had a little bit of the day where you observe Shiva, and then that's when the Shiva ends. Anyways, what?
So we count the first day even if they stop for
exactly the same reason. The exact same reason. Correct. In any case, so I said, but that's not. I said I didn't prepare that. There's a Tosfos said that it was involved. So I said I didn't prepare that because it's not got to do with Tosfos. He says everything relates to everything else. In Kol Torah Kula, everything relates to everything else. And he gave me a really stunning example. What is the halacha if you're saying Kri'at Shema, okay, and you lost your place?
You go back to the last place you remembered.
Near the top of the paragraph.
Correct, that's correct. What happens if you get to Uktavtam al mezuzot beitecha v'sharecha and you don't know which paragraph you're in? Because the first one and the second one both have that pasuk in it. What's the halacha?
Logically, it should be there up top.
So the din is if you feel the inner push to say the word lema'an, which is the last pasuk in the second parsha, then the assumption is sirchei naked va'alaza, that people are creatures of habit, and therefore you can assume that you've already said the first paragraph in toto, and that you're really on your way to finishing the second one. You can just keep going. So in other words, this halacha establishes or expresses the power of habit and the normative power of habit in recitations. Okay, very nice. So this Rebbe said to me, okay, in Hilchas Malicha, okay, you're not allowed to eat blood, the blood of an animal, of either a chicken or a fowl, or of a beef or something like that. Okay, yafet, or deer either. And in order to be able to koshering involves three stages. Stage number one is called hadacha rishona, that you take the meat and this is what the butcher does today, but it used to be, my mother used to kosher meat, I remember as a kid. Now nobody knows how to do it, except the butchers. What you do is first you take the meat and you wash it down to take off anything that was on the surface of the meat. Then you take a board, you put it at an angle, and you salt it heavily on both sides, okay? And you let it go for half hour, 40 minutes, whatever it is. And then you take the meat and you wash it off, because what the salt does is pull out the blood, and you wash off the meat, and you're finished. What happens if you washed off the meat? You have a piece of meat, and you're washing it, and you don't remember, if you washed the first one, did the first washing or not?
What's your instinct to do next?
Oh, so the answer, no, so it's close, but the din is, if you roll the asirche naked vazel, since most people who know how to kosher meat know that you're supposed to wash it first, then if you've already salted it and you're just washing off the salt, you can assume that you've already done the first one as well. He says, so you see here that you derive a din in Hilchas Malicha and Dam from a halacha of Hilchas Kri'at Shema, not because there's an inherent connection between Kri'at Shema and Malicha, but because there's a global recognition of the power of habit that finds expression in both places. Okay, so that's exactly what happened over here. The Gemara said, the Mishnah and then the Gemara says that perpetuity does not necessarily mean 24/7. It can mean significant action in the course of a day, and the same rule that applies for the lechem apanim applies for Talmud Torah. So that's number one. It's a big chiddush, meaning that the Torah says you should always learn Torah. However, the minimum is that you have to do in the morning and the evening, and then you have done the minimum amount. Notice, he says that there's a mitzvah of lo yamush. Okay, it's a funny use of the word, because a mitzvah would mean that there's that the Torah is a commandment to never do anything else but learn. But this pasuk is found in Navi. The Navim and Ksuvim are not legislative. So that's number one. Number two, you have very nice, but it's not as intense and not as global as Lo Yamush. But in any case, he says that would be sufficient. That you learn a little in the morning, you learn a little in the evening. Obviously, Kol HaMosif, Mosifin though, everything, the more that you do, the more that the better you are. However, if you've learned in the more, by implication, if we're talking about studying something else aside from Torah in the narrow sense, I'll talk about that in a sec. In the narrow sense, there is room to do other things, which lines up nicely with the Medrash that we saw. He says, we'd love to learn all day long, but we have to make a living. So the Medrash also said, you give the Torah its due, and you can study other things. Says Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Afilu lo kara adam ela Kri'at Shema shachrit va'arvit, kiyem lo yamush. Even if you daven in the morning and the evening, you daven Shachris, daven Ma'ariv, you said Kri'at Shema, because Kri'at Shema we saw is not just a din of recitation and a declaration of and a pledge of allegiance. It's also a pledge of allegiance which is established through the act of Talmud Torah. It's not just recitation; it's also Torah study. Okay, and I mentioned to you that those people that hold the Talmud that Kri'at Shema is the Rabbanon, it's not quite that. It's not quite that. That's not quite what it means. What Kri'at Shema the Rabbanon means is there's a mitzvah midoraisa to study morning and night something from the Torah, and the Rabbanon the rabbis determined that the text that you should fill that obligation is in fact Kri'at Shema, because you merge the act of Talmud Torah with a declaration of or pledge allegiance of Kabbalah Somach Shemayim. There were two separate. In other words, when you say Kri'at Shema in the morning, there were 2 or 3 separate kiyumim in the mitzvah. Let's assume that Kri'at Shema is the Raisa, that the Torah wants you to say this specific passage. So you say that specific passage. That's one. Number 2 is a kiyum of Talmud Torah, and number 3 is a kiyum of Kabbalah Somach Shemayim. Those are 3 different mitzvahs, 3 different kiyumim, which are established, which find expression in that one action, in that one performance. That's the reason, by the way. The Rambam points out that Kri'at Shema is a mitzvah to say Shezman Grama. So women, it sounds odd to say, women are chayiv in tefillah. It's an open Mishnah. It's an open Mishnah in brachos, but they're patur from Kri'at Shema. Why? Because of the mitzvah says Shezman Grama. It's a time-bound commandment, and women are exempt. Comes the Magen Avraham in Shulchan Aruch and says that's very nice. They may be exempt. They may be exempt from the specific performance of reciting Kri'at Shema within this specific time frame, but they are not exempt from Kabbalah Somach Shemayim, which is a mitzvah that sheshelo azman graman because it applies 24/7. So therefore, when women daven, they have to, even if they don't daven bazman, they have to say Kri'at Shema because there's a mitzvah of Kabbalah Somach Shemayim every single day. Something similar, by the way. Not related to our topic, but as long as it's relevant here. When Rav Soloveitchik began the push that women should study Torah Shebaal Peh, this is of course the machlokas between Tanoim in the Gemara and Sota, and the Rambam seems to paskin that women are exempt from Torah Shebaal Peh. It might even be that they're patur from Torah Shebaal Peh. They might be patur from Talmud Torah, period. So Rav Soloveitchik said, it may very well be that women are exempt from the formal obligation to study Torah that the men have. But they are obligated at the same time, and you can use the Rambam for this, they are obligated to worship God through and encounter the Rebbeinu Shalom through the act of Talmud Torah, just like the men. So therefore, and I told you that the Rambam I read it to you. The Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs in Mitzvah Tasei Hey says explicitly the mitzvah of Avodas Hashem, which women are also chayav in, expresses itself through prayer and through study. So, in other words, even though you're not a chayav in the whole package, that doesn't exempt you totally from it either. Okay, let's go. So let's go back. With davar asur lo amro b'fnei amaretz. Amaretz have to study. People that are interested in learning, you don't have to convince them that they should learn. However, to tell an Amaretz who's not that interested in learning in the first place that he's Yotzei by saying Kri'at Shema in the morning and the evening, don't tell him, because you want him to feel good and guilty and feel really stupid. So that he'll think that he has a lot more learning to do, which he doesn't. The Rava Amar, interestingly, so that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Rava later said, Mitzvah la'omro b'fnei Amaretz. No. You have to tell that to Amaratzim. You have to, because they're going to feel depressed. They'll say, I'm not educated. I have no place. I have no connection to the mitzvah Talmud Torah. I'll never be able to. It's too big for me. I'm not smart enough. I don't have time. I'm a shoemaker, and my grandfather's a shoemaker. Nothing wrong with shoemakers. I have no time. I'm totally, God has abandoned me. It's a mitzvah to say, no, you've fulfilled the minimum. Try to do more, but don't feel like you're out of the ballgame. Yeah.
You can't unbecome an Amaretz though if you don't start learning. So
Well, obviously, it depends how you do it. There's a wonderful show. I don't know if you're familiar with this, because it's more my time than your time. There's a Jewish band. There's a Jewish ensemble or band from New York, Toronto. I forgot already where. Called Journeys. They've put out four albums, and one of the, you can see it on YouTube. It's called Journey. There's another song called Journeys there's another group that's called Journeys, which is a regular rock band, but this is called Journeys. A.B. Rottenberg is the guy who who produced and composed the music, and he has one of the songs on his second album, I think, is called Yankel. And Yankel was an Amaretz, and it tells the story of Yankel and his frustrations and how come he couldn't seem to learn and stuff like that. So that fits Rava. That's why I'm mentioning it. Okay. Anyways, so we've seen, so far what have we seen? Number one, that there's a minimum. Number two, that your Yotze, the minimum of Lo Yamush, by learning morning and evening a little bit. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that you're even Yotze if you say Kri'at Shema morning and evening. Fine. So then flipping, the Gemara asks the following: Sha'al ben Dama ben Achoso shel Rabbi Yishmael et Rabbi Yishmael. There was a guy whose name was Elisha ben Dama. Elisha ben Dama pops up in various places in Shas. He was Rabbi Yishmael's nephew. Now, who's Rabbi Yishmael? Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha was a Tana. He often mostly interacted with Rabbi Yehuda and also with Rabbi Akiva, and he had a nephew who was very, very smart, and he asked his uncle. His uncle was a bit of a kanoi. His uncle was a bit of a zealot, and he said, "Okay, you say there's a minimum. Are you ever yotze the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? Kagon on me. Let's take me. Shalamadati kol haTorah kula. I learned the entire Torah, which assumes that you can, which is an interesting statement by itself. I studied kol haTorah kula. Mahu lilmod chokhmat Yevanit. Can I study secular studies? Now, what's Chokhmat Yevanit? There's a whole to do. Some people say that it's pagan ritual. Some people say it's philosophy. Some people say it's science. Let's for the moment, let's just assume it means secular studies. Don't forget, in addition, that there's no such thing as secular. That's another thing that has to be stated, and I always have to be careful with this when you look at discussions of this issue in the pre-modern era. Secularism as a phenomenon, secularism as a philosophy did not exist in areas where the Jews lived until at least the 17th century. All right? There's no such thing as secular. Everything was religious. Okay? Everything was religious. The pagans, okay, who developed pagan wisdom? Who are the custodians of so-called pagan wisdom?
Jews.
The priests. Not the Jews. The priests. All right? The ambiance of Greek culture was pagan, even if the pagans were not that frum. All right? Theaters were dedicated to the gods. All theater presentations were either under the sponsorship of a god or a goddess. They would sacrifice to a god or a goddess. The major material was pagan mythology or connected thereto. It was deeply, deeply imbued in pagan everything, which is the exact opposite of Torah. When Chazal say, Kol modeh b'avodah zara kekofer b'chol Torah kula, v'chol kofer b'avodah zara, modeh keilu modeh b'chol Torah kula, they made it into an absolute binary. Who's the enemy of who's the major enemy of God in Tanakh from beginning to end? It's avodah zara. Okay, so therefore, when he's asking Chochmat Yevanint, there's a few questions over here. Is it possible to transcend the pagan, Zitzim-laden context of non-Jewish culture? What would that include? Would that include philosophy? Would that include logic? Would that include mathematics? Maybe yeah, maybe no. You could argue the point, but the context is always them. Okay, I don't like to use this word because it's too much. It's used too often. It's othering of the other knowledge. So let's assume for a moment. He learned Kol Torah. Kuli just wants to know: is he now sufficiently a master of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and he knows Torah sufficiently to be able to study something else? So Rabbi Yishmael, his uncle, who as I said, was a bit of a kanoi, says, Lo yamush sefer haTorah ze mipicha v'agita bo yamam v'layla. Okay? In other words, in contrast to the previous sugya, which said you fulfill it minimally, you fulfill the requirements of Agisa bo Yamam v'Layla by learning a little bit in the morning, a little in the afternoon, or in the evening, or even just saying Kri'at Shema. He said, Tzei uvedok sha'a she'ina lo min hayom v'lo min halayla ulamod ba chochmat Yevanit. Find the time which isn't day or night, then that's when you can. Study Chochmat Yevanit, meaning, in his opinion, what? You can't.
Yeah.
You can't. You can't. There's no hour which is day or night. Even Ben Hashmashos. Well, the whole question. Ben Hashmashot. What's the big debate? When you have this fear between astronomical. Let's go with the girl. The astronomical sunset and Seita Kochavim. All right. So what is Ben Hashmashos? Ben Hashmashos is a time of Safek. What's the Safek? The Safek is either we don't know when the actual line of delineation between day and night is, so therefore we treat it all like one big Safek. Or you say that it's sort of like a little bit of both. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's day and night all the time. So that's one position, all right? And then, says the Gemara, he's not the only guy in town. He's not the only act in town. Ufliga de Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, and he disagrees with Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. Damar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani abar Yonatan. Pasuk zeh. No, it's what I told you before. It's a pasuk in Navi. It can't be legislative. Naviim cannot. With Eila mitzvot melamed she'ein Navi rashai lechadesh davar me'ata means that Naviim are not allowed. The only Navi who's allowed to who gives law is Moshe Rabbeinu. It's one of the Rambam says one of the ramifications of v'lo kam Navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. Okay. V'lo mitzvah, lo chova v'lo mitzvah ela bracha. No. He says it's not you don't have to learn 24 hours a day. There's not even a mitzvah. It's a bracha. Ra'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu et Yoshua she'divrei Torah chavivin alav biyoter. He saw how much Yoshua loved Torah. Shene'amar, when he was a stagiaire for Moshe Rabbeinu. Umisharto Yoshua ben Nun nar lo yamush mitoch ha'ohel. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshua kol kach chavivin alecha divrei Torah lo yamush sefer Torah v'zeh mipicha. So in this little passage, you have three different approaches to the question of a theoretical possibility of satisfying the minimum requirements of Talmud Torah sufficiently to learn something else. You have the first opinion, which is as a minimum, you should obviously maximize, which allows for it, because Lo Yamush is satisfied by day and night. You frame your day with Limud Torah. By the way, that's one of the things that machlokas between the Rambam and the Ramban, whether Kri'at Shema is one mitzvah or two mitzvahs. Either way, the idea of Kabbalah Salmachus Shamayim in the morning and the evening is you frame your day, first thing and last thing, with a pledge of allegiance. Second opinion is that of Rabbi Yishmael saying, the Torah is endless. When are you going to... I don't know if he's worried about the pasuk or the fact that the temerity of his nephew to say, I learned Kol Torah Kula. Huh? Really? You know everything? Huh? Really? And the third one is, I don't know if there's a minimum. But Lo Yamush is a bracha. If you love Torah, you'll be blessed the same way that Yeshua was. Right? Certainly, that would be, at least in terms of its initial ways of looking at the text, 3 different approaches to the question of Torah learning. When we get to look at, when we look a little bit later at the Nefesh HaChaim and others, you'll see that there's a whole other way of looking at this, but that's enough for now. Okay, so that's that part of the introduction. What I want to look at now, in the time that we have left, is an amazing exchange, which is in the Gemara, starts in the Gemara, and raises really interesting issues with regard to science, and with regard to medicine, and with regard to all kinds of issues that people that secularists like to throw up towards against Chazal and against tradition. So let's take a look. Gemara's Torah says in the Medrash says in Eicha Rabbah. We're starting with this. There's a pasuk in Eicha that says Malka v'sareh bagoyim ein Torah. That the king, the king and his ministers have been exiled among the goyim, where there is no Torah. Okay. Says the Gemara, it's a famous passage. Im yomar lecha adam, yesh chokhmah bagoyim, ta'amin. We are not denying. If somebody tells you that the goyim have wisdom, that they have culture, that they have knowledge, believe them. Hadahu dichtiv, and there's a pasuk that supports it from Ovadia. At the end of days, God will cause the wise men of Edom and the understanding men, the intellectuals of Haresav, to be destroyed. Meaning that up until then, there are wise men and there are intellectuals. Okay. Yesh Torah bagoyim al tamin. They may have wisdom, they may have knowledge, they may have science, but Torah they don't have. Dichtiv. Malka v'sarim bagoyim, their king and her king and her ministers are among the nations where there is no Torah. Okay. Now I don't know how to define at the moment. Well, I do, but I'm not going to do it. I don't know. I'm not going to define for the moment what Torah means and what Chochmah means. But what is clear is that there is a constructive intellectual and cultural corpus or body of knowledge which the Goyim have and which is legitimate. Okay? In that context, okay, let's look at the following passage from Psachim. Tanu Rabbanan. Chachmei Yisrael omrim galgal kavua umazalot chozrin. V'chachmei umot haolam omrim galgal chozer umazalot kvuim. Okay, what is this? There was a debate. The Gemara records a debate in which, are you familiar with this? Have you seen this before? Okay, so what's it mean?
It's the fundamental debate is on. I mean, it's enough to kind of outdated astrophysics at this point, basically. They're debating whether the galgal, which is like the sphere, is in a fixed place.
What issue are they trying to describe?
The sun goes around the earth, or the earth goes around.
Well, first they're trying to say, okay. First of all, they're both geocentric. That the Earth is in the middle.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, they're both geocentric.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
yes.
sorry.
All right. What are they trying to account for? They're trying to account for the motions of the heavenly bodies. So the Chachamim have it. So Chachmei Yisrael say that the planets and the stars are free flowing, and they move under this great globe, and they move across the sky, and they go out, and then they travel underneath. They basically. Let me see if it has a. See if it has a. No, I don't think there's a. No, there isn't a. I usually have a touche, but I don't have one now. All right. What they have is like according to. Let me draw it on a piece of paper this way. All right. Roughly speaking, the Jewish position was based on Psukim, okay, that let's do it like a half. Okay. So here is the world, and there is this sphere. Let's call it the Rakia, okay? Right? Here. And what happens is that the stars and the planets and everything, but let's use the sun. The sun moves through this sphere, okay, and then cuts around the world this way, then eases itself out that way, and then travels underneath at night, and that's the way things work. But the planets in the heavenly bodies are free moving. The Gentiles base themselves on what's called the Ptolemean version of the universe, where there are a series of Look, they didn't know about gravity, and they didn't know about force of motion and all this other stuff. So they try to figure out how come the planets don't just fall down to Earth. I mean, they knew that if you throw up a rock, it falls down. I mean, they didn't know that there was they didn't know about gravitational fields. They would say, Aristotle would say, if a rock falls down, it's because that's its nature to do so. But there were a series of concentric crystalline spheres into which each one is embedded in one of the stars of the sky. It goes around, and that's how you get the planetary motions. Okay. So that's what that means. Galgal Kavua, that according to Chachmei Yisrael, there's this the sphere is set, and the planets and the sun move. V'Chachmei Umot Haolam Omrim Galgal Chozer U'Mazalot Kvuim. No, each star is in a different crystalline sphere, and they move around and so on. You get, as a result, they make noise. We'll see in a minute. They may, according to later astronomers, there's music of the spheres. There actually is. It's not really music of the spheres, but there are. There's a connection between music and math and higher math and stuff like that. So was it Kepler? I think it was Kepler who thought that there was. Yeah, I think it was Kepler who talked about the music of the spheres, that there are eighths and fifths and stuff like that between the various spheres that makes music and so on. Anyway, let me show you. Anything interesting about Kepler, by the way? You ever been to Prague? Anybody? Okay. So in Prague, Prague was famous for many things. Among the things they were famous for was the fact that there was a Danish astronomer whose name was Tycho Brahe, whose observatory was on Prague Hill. And Brahe had he was really the one that set the stage for Copernicus, and he developed one of the earliest really high power telescopes and so on. He had two, and he's buried in Thai Cathedral in old city Prague. Brahe had two, research assistants. One's name was Johannes Kepler, and the other one, who was very famous, an astronomer, and the other one was a guy named David Gans. David Gans was a Polish Jew who was a Talmud Muvak of the Ramah. The Ramah himself, Moshe Isserles, was very interested in not just halacha, but he was interested in philosophy, interested in Kabbalah, interested in history, and he was interested in astronomy. And he sent Gans to Prague, which was the Oxford or the Cambridge or the Harvard or whatever of the medieval world. He was very intellectually alive and so on, to study history and to study astronomy. So he wrote two books. One book was called One book was called Tzemach David, which is a history of the world, and then he wrote a history of the Jewish people, as 2 volumes of the same book. And the other thing, he wrote a book called Nechmad Benaim, which is a treatise on astronomy. He actually is the first Hebrew work to mention Copernicus, although he thinks Copernicus is wrong. All right, not important. In any case, so David Gans and Kepler were Brahe's TAs, and they worked with him together and on his discoveries. The thing about Kepler was very jealous of his teacher, and there were rumors that he actually had Brahe poisoned and stole everything Kepler ever did. He stole and published under his own name. Gans wasn't stupid enough to do it, even if he wanted to. Wasn't stupid enough to do that, because if a Jew would get caught with that, forget it. It would not end well. In any event, so these are the two models of the universe that were debated according to the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, "Tshuva ledivreihem me'olam lo matzinu." We have never been able to refute. A tshuva does not just mean an answer. A tshuva means a debating point. Okay? If you look in Rashi, for example, Rashi, on a number of occasions, quotes a Gemara in Yuma, where he says how when he talks about chukim, those mitzvahs that are not obviously rational, he says, these are things which are difficult to understand, but umos ha'olam mishivin aleihem. The nations mishivim aleihem. What they answer them? No. Lihashiv means to debate. Okay, when Rashi says tshuvat haminim, he means these are debating points when you're debating with heretics, and mostly it means Christians, because the Christians were always trying to prove Christianity from the Bible, and these would be the refutations of their interpretations. In any case, so we've never been able to refute their opinions. And then he says, because sometimes Taurus is in the south and Scorpio is in the north, and I don't want to go into all of their arguments. Look at the last line. After going through he goes through a few different issues. Finally, the last line, what's important. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, "V'nirin divreihem midvarenu." He says their opinion approach seems to be more reasonable than ours. He says because during the day, the waters, the seas, the fountains, whatever, are cold, and at night they're hot, which would indicate that there's a lot of this entire system of suns and stars is busy boiling everything up during the day. All right. This Gemara therefore says that we have an astronomical or astrophysical model which competes with the non-Jews, apparently on equal footing. So you have to use what we even then call scientific argument, whether the Jews are right or the Jews are wrong, or who's right, who's wrong. And it would seem he's willing to argue, or willing to admit that what they say seems to be more reasonable. Okay? Nearing. He's not being absolute. He's not being determinative. He's not deciding it. Their position makes more sense. So there are areas of Torah, or at least areas of Jewish belief and concept, which will have halakhic implications, because it depends on how you tell time, right? For which we will willing to perhaps, according to this text, what's the word?
Almost concede.
Concede. Thank you. All right. There's a passage from the Rambam that I want to skip for a minute. We'll come back to it in a minute. Look at the next page. Okay. Now, every single Talmudic manuscript, every single Talmudic manuscript that I have looked at, and they're all online, say Nirim, have the text exactly the way that they know that Rabbi Yehuda was willing to theoretically maybe concede, okay, but without taking a firm stance. There is a Yemenite book called Midrash HaGadol. It's published. People learn from it, and it preserves other girsaot of the Gemara on tons and tons of issues. Okay, take a look. This is Andreas. Tana Rabbanon. Ketzad mazalot kvuin barakia. Okay, how are the stars and the astral bodies stuck in the sky or in the galgal? Rabbi Shimon ben Levi, Rabbi Lazar omrim barakia asui katara umazalot malchin v'galgal omed. That's the Jewish position, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Levi omer no. Kehadein Antalya. All right, we'll skip. Chachmei Goyim Omrim Harakia Asoi Kegalgal Umazalot Kvuim Vagalgal Mahalech. Okay, Agala Batzafon Bein Azaz Mimakoma. That's an indication that the Goyim are right because Taurus is always in a certain specific place. V'nitzku Chachmei Umot Haolam LeChachmei Yisrael. It wasn't a matter of it looks like they make more sense, but rather the Gemara itself, according to this Girsa, says that they decisively defeated them. In other words, that the Ptolemean model decisively refuted the Jewish model. Okay? Which means that it's possible, and that therefore normatively, there were areas on which we and the non-Jews are on equal footing. Number two, they can defeat the traditional Jewish position. Okay. Now, but I just told you. Just a second. I just told you that all the Gemaras, all the manuscripts say Nirim. So what am I making you crazy with this other Girsa from Yemen that's in a 13th century manuscript? Now go to the Rambam. Okay, since we don't have a lot of time, I'm not going to go through the whole passage. Count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 lines from the bottom. He's talking about the music of the spheres and all kinds of stuff, and he had a machlokas between Ptolemy and Aristotle, or although Ptolemy lived later. He said, but basically Aristotle represents the position, more or less the position we talked about. Velo tarchik, don't reject or don't push away. Heyot dat Aristo cholek al dat chachamim bazeh. Don't flip out because Aristotle disagrees with the rabbis. Kizeh hada'at, because this opinion, rotzel omar heyot lehem kolot, that they make sounds, that the spheres make sounds. Omnam hu nimshach achar ha'amanat galgal kavua mazalot chozrim. That the position that there are music of the spheres, it goes with the Jewish position. Ukvar yadata hachra'atam, that the rabbis themselves determined dat umot ha'olam al da'atam binyanei tchuna ha'elu. Tchuna is astronomy. The rabbis themselves paskined that they're right, we're wrong in this issue of astronomy. V'hu amram b'ferush, and that is based on their explicit statement, B'nitzchu chachmei umot ha'olam chachmei Yisrael. The Rambam clearly had a girsa of nitzchu. And we know this was the dominant girsa throughout the Sephardic world, because it's quoted by Provençal Chachamim. It's quoted by Dan Yitzchak Abravanel. Okay? It's even quoted in a place that you didn't expect. Turn the page. Okay. Now, there is a one of the I mean, it's historically this is true. One of the striking differences between Ashkenazim and Sefardim, and by Sefardim I mean all Mizrahi Jews, or Mizrahi civilization, is that for all kinds of reasons, which we'll get into, the Mizrahi Sephardic world was always much more open to critically and judiciously including wisdom and knowledge which had a non-Jewish source in their curriculum. So that's why the average Talmid Chacham knew some chemistry, and he knew some biology, and he knew some philosophy, and certainly knew math and logic and all kinds of stuff, at the same time as Gedolei Torah learned Kol Torah Kula. Okay? It was just a given. Ashkenazim, for whatever reason, with some exceptions, from day one, have always been constitutionally allergic to anything secular. I mean, I'm going back to the early Middle Ages, from the beginning of Ashkenaz. Ashkenazi Jewish historians who wanted to feel like they wouldn't be left behind in the 19th, 20th century desperately found one guy over here and one guy over there and a couple of people over there. I mean, but the picture is, that's the picture. Okay? And the Sefardim could never understand why the Ashkenazim are killing themselves. Of course you can learn math. Of course you can learn geometry. First of all, you need to learn, anybody ever opened up a Gemara knows you need math and advanced math and certain sciences to be able to understand the Gemara. In fact, I have a friend who has argued, I'm enumerate, so I can't judge either way, but because he's a very smart guy, I assume that he's right. He claims that all of Masechet Kinim, at the end of which is all about what happens if this korban gets lost and this whenever, is all based on a very, very, very sophisticated understanding of probability. Okay? All right. Why am I telling you this? Now let's take a look at this Gemara in Ksubas. The Mishnah in Ksubas in the first parak says as follows: if you saw a woman, you saw a woman talking to some guy. Va'amrula, and they asked him, "Mativo shel ish zeh." What's this guy? Who is this guy? Who are you talking to? She says, and she's pregnant. Is she pregnant? No. He ish ploni v'kohenu. He's so and so, and he's a kohen. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar, Omrim Ne'amenes. We believe her. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Lo mipi al chayim, we don't pay attention to her. Hooray, he bezu b'cheskes be'ula nesin al-mam zerachet v'raya l'divrei. She had a relationship with this guy. He says he's a miyuchas, he's a kohen, he's a this, he's a that, he's my boyfriend, and he's kosher v'yosher. And Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar say, fine, we believe her. Rabbi Yoshua says, no. Okay. Haitamu uberet, if she was pregnant. V'amrula mativo shel ubarzeh. That, by the way, is a famous question. If a new guy comes into the base matter, you say mativo shel ubarzeh. What's the quality? What's the characteristic of this fetus? She says meish ploni. I'm pregnant by so and so, and he's a kohen. Same deal. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shua said no. Until she proves otherwise, we assume she had relations with a mamzer. All right. Let's skip down a little bit. The Gemara then says, "My ka'amar lahu, uma kamar adyahu." The Gemara had previously proven that had actually sustained the position of Rabbi Yoshua with regard to the woman who was pregnant. Hashevetanu al ha'me'uberet, ma teshivenu al ha'me'uberet. But you didn't prove that, in fact, if she was just talking, that you should believe her or not believe her. Okay. What does hashevatanu? You've responded to us, or you have replied, or you have responded in a part of a halachic debate with regard to the case of the woman when she's pregnant. Perish Rashi. When the Gemara or the Mishnah uses the word lahashiv, it doesn't mean stam an answer, or it's called a dichya b'kash, sort of like something go away. Rather, it means tshuva gemura v'nitzachat. Means it's a final clinching argument. Okay? The word tshuva means a clinching argument. Skip down to the two more lines. The fourth word, b'chein shamati. B'chein shamati mishmo shel Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, so then the Tosfos says, wait, no, it could also mean just, he gave an answer, so but nothing final. It's just like it wasn't. He didn't destroy your argument. He just said it's not. There's a question still open. So b'chein shamati mishmo shel Rabbeinu Tam. Shaya Omer came. He said, and he would say, Al Hada Amrinan, with regard to our Gemara in Psachim. Misha Hayatame, Chachmei Yisrael Omrim, Galgal Kavod Mazalach Chozrim, Chachmei Umot Olam Omrim, Amrinan Hatam Rebbe Tshuva L'Divrayim Lo Matzanu. We did not find an answer to their we did not find an answer to their response, or what's the word? A final response to their to defend our model. Okay, Rashi would say yes. But V'amar Rabbeinu Tam da'at al gab dinitzchu chachmei umot haolam lechachmei Yisrael hainu nitzachon b'ta'anot aval ha'emetu kechachmei Yisrael. He says the word tshuva means a temporary answer, something to think about, but it's certainly not determinative. And even though the Gemara says that they beat us, it doesn't mean that they beat us forever. It meant that they stumped us for the moment, which means that his girsa was nitzchut. Means despite the fact that all the Gemaras that we have say nirin, every place apparently said nitzchut. Except the difference is that the Rambam and all of Chachmei Sfarad, and perhaps Rashi too, say that on this issue they beat us and we have to accept their model when we figure out Zmanei Tefillah and Shabbat and all kinds of stuff. And Rabbi Yitzchak says no. Nitzchu also doesn't mean to finalize. It doesn't mean finality. It means, they stumped us. Stumped the judge. He gave us an answer we have to think about. But it's not determinative. Nitzchum b'ta'anot. You can also, he says, you can make arguments that are convincing, but it doesn't mean that tells the truth. You can actually convince somebody something which is totally not true, objectively. And that's his point. By the way, Rabbeinu Tam is absolutely consistent here. Because, Rabbeinu Tam's man is later, is always later than everything else, because Rabbeinu Tam, Ben Hashmashas Rabbeinu Tam is the time that it takes the sun to go through the crystalline sphere. When you don't see it, but there's light. So in other words, this has direct implications for when you start Shabbos or end Shabbos. Okay, at least end Shabbos.
Holds that
Chachmei
Yisrael was still correct.
Correct. So you have here, so this whole business over here raises the question of, and you have all the possibilities. It raises the question, and you have question of A, is there Chochmah B'Goyim or not? What does that mean? What happens when the Chochmat Goyim, at least in areas of science, contradicts the position of Chazal? How do you go with it? You accept them? Is that a violation of Torah or not? Or we say no. You could say that if the Goyim come and say that that I don't know, the tefillin, scientifically I could prove that tefillin should be blue and they should have feathers on them or something like that. You would say no. Why? Because Torah they have their own Torah, they might have Chachma. But the whole question, this has to be very nuanced. How are you going to play the interaction over here? What's the and your comment? I didn't. You made a very good comment a few minutes ago, which I didn't mention because I needed to quote it now. The Ptolemean system, of course, we don't accept anymore because we accept the Copernican heliocentric system. But ultimately, the Jews were right, because all right, we don't talk about Galgalim and all kinds of stuff, but the planets are in free motion. They do move on their own. They move because of gravitational forces and stuff like that, and electromagnetic fields. But in terms of how things work. And so, you'll say the Chazal were geocentric and not heliocentric. That's true. But when it comes to needing to determine and to calculate the times for tefillah, I hate to say it, we live geocentric lives. We are here. So as far as we're concerned, okay, we're geocentric. We want to talk about the universe, Mela, but the universe is not all that relevant in terms of figuring out, what time is Lichtenstein. So that's the irony. The Rabbeinu Tam, who seems to be my point is the Rabbeinu Tam seems to be a reactionary here. I'm not going to go with all the scientists. In the end, it turns out he was right, and at least partially right, and the Chachmei Umot Olam were wrong. Okay, Ad Kan the Mavo, and we will continue next time.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
But now we get to the fascinating question of where this